the SEC is one of the key reasons that the capital markets of the United States have primacy all over the world is because of the integrity and history of the SEC. And now they won't tell us what's okay and what's not okay until they sue you.
This content is brought to you by Uphold, which is a great crypto platform that I've been using since 2018. Uphold has all the top cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, and all the altcoins. In fact, they have 260 plus cryptocurrencies on their platform. You can also trade precious metals, stablecoins, and 37 fiat currencies. In addition, they are available in over 150 countries. And this platform is fully reserved. They do audits, so you can trust that your funds are safe, no commingling, no lending out your funds. If you'd like to learn more about Uphold, please visit the link in the description. Welcome to the Thinking Crypto podcast. With me today is James Murphy, who is the founder and principal of MetaLawMan LLC. James, great to have you on.
Thanks, Tony. Love your show and really looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, James, I've been following you for a while on Twitter, or what Elon would call X now, and you share a lot of great perspective and information on what's happening in the crypto market as it relates to regulations, securities law, and much more. So I have a ton of questions for you, but let's get started with your background. Tell us about where you're from and your professional background.
Absolutely. Well, I'm from a lot of places. I moved around quite a bit. As a kid, the last 3 years in high school, I was in 10th grade in Southern California, 11th grade in Little Rock, Arkansas, and 12th grade in a little tiny town in Mississippi, where I graduated from high school. So got to meet a lot of people, moved around quite a bit, and saw a lot of the country, which was good. My father was a lawyer and a law professor, and really inspired me and my sister, who's also a lawyer and a law professor. I'm just a lawyer, not a law professor. My mother immigrated to the United States when she was 19 years old, and it is the stereotypical story of a 19-year-old young woman coming from Germany with $100 in her pocket and dreams of coming to America. And on my father's side, the Irish side, I'm a Murphy. His father came across from Ireland through Ellis Island and landed with the immigrant community of New York. And so, my sister and I are the product of immigrants, and we kind of fit the stereotype, which is a real focus on education. Now, my sister did take it to heart more than I did. So she was a superstar, kind of like Vivek Ramaswamy. She was graduated from the University of Virginia, Phi Beta Kappa. She was on the law review at Yale Law School, worked at the United States Supreme Court, the whole thing. Really brilliant person. Now she's a law professor. I practiced law for 35 years, mainly in the securities industry. I started off in Los Angeles, representing what we now refer to as TradFi, traditional finance companies, JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, et cetera, in LA. And then I moved back to the East Coast and continued securities regulation and litigation as my primary focus. And then 2010, I decided I was going to take a risk and start my own law firm, really focused on representing the big players in TradFi, including stock exchanges like the New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ, CME, and CBOE, and others. And so I started in 2010, right after the financial crisis, and hired a bunch of people who had worked at the SEC, who had worked at the CFTC, who were federal prosecutors in the Southern District of New York, also people who worked at FINRA. So we really covered the waterfront. And things were going great. We opened an office in Washington, D.C., in New York City, and in Richmond, Virginia. And then 2017, I pivoted personally and then pivoted the entire law firm. And that's when I discovered, Bitcoin and crypto, and it really had a significant impact on my life and the career and the trajectory of that law firm.
Wow, what a journey. And a question for you, because you've seen TradFi securities and the dealings between the agencies, SEC and CFTC and so forth. How does that compare to what we're experiencing now with how the SEC is handling crypto? Are there any major differences, or is it kind of the same? You're getting a lot of pushback from these agencies. Maybe they don't have things in order. There's confusion, or is crypto something new with new dynamics?
It's very different. Because when you're talking about a Goldman Sachs or a big commercial bank that is a public company, they are in constant communication with the SEC, whether it's the Division of Corporate Finance, involving their periodic disclosures, or they're coming out with a new product that needs to go through perhaps the Division of Trading and Markets. And often these large institutions have hired people who worked at the SEC. And so they can pick up the phone and call somebody that they were in the next office to for years, and say, hey, we've got an issue over here. Would like to come in and talk to you about it. And it's really, in my experience, is a very cooperative kind of relationship. There would be times where a big bank or investment bank, broker dealer would do something wrong, and then there would be a negotiated settlement. Be very, very rare to fight because it's your primary regulator. And so do you really want to beat them, and how's that going to impact your relationship going forward? And so what I experienced in the course of my career of over 30 years is different from what I'm seeing in the nature of the interaction between the SEC and some of these new players that really want to disrupt what has been working well in the view of many for decades. They want to disrupt it, and so they're looked at with some suspicion. That won't surprise you. So no, it's pretty different.
Mm. And what are your thoughts on how Gary Gensler, as the chair of the SEC, has been running the show, and given his past where he was teaching at MIT crypto and blockchain, absolutely gets it. He's very knowledgeable about it, but has seemingly done a 180 under his role as the chair and reporting to Elizabeth Warren?
It's very unusual, some of the stuff that we've seen. Now, some of the people that I hired at my firm worked for Gary at the CFTC. And so we sponsored kind of lunch and learns with our clients to explain to them what to expect with Gary at the SEC. And that is, he really likes to move fast and make changes. And he's really kind of focused and determined on what he wants to achieve. Whereas the SEC is really designed to be quite process oriented, where new rules take time and you get input from the industry, and then those rules are put out for comment, and the comments are supposed to actually be taken into consideration in the development of the final rules. And so you see instances where Chairman Gensler has kind of gone around that entire process and just brought enforcement actions to make a point and establish authority that the SEC does not have explicitly from Congress. And so that's a little bit unusual, and that's where the phrases come from of regulation by enforcement is not really how it's supposed to work at the SEC. And so, it's I've never seen anything quite like this, where the courts have had to tell the chairman, you must do this, you must follow the law. No, that decision was arbitrary and capricious. And you're hearing that so much now that people think, well, that's like a normal thing. Well, no, arbitrary and capricious is a serious breach of process. It's not, you got the decision wrong. It's more than that. It is your process and the decision-making was arbitrary and not backed by reason and not backed by the law. It's arbitrary and capricious. And I've said this many times. This concept goes way, way, way back to the Magna Carta of 1215. It goes back 800 years.
Wow.
The royalty, kings and queens, were allowed to act in any way they wanted, arbitrarily and capriciously. That's what they did. And they could arrest someone. And one of their subjects will say, well, what have I been arrested for? You've been arrested because the king says you need to be arrested and put in jail. That's it. Well, what's the law? There's no law. The law is the king. And so the Magna Carta was supposed to establish a rule of law that the royalty there was supposed to comply with the rule of law. And that rule of law was supposed to be something that everyone, even people who couldn't read, would be able to understand. Here's what's permitted and here's what's not permitted, so that they could order their lives in a way that they comply with the law. That's how it's supposed to be. And there's 800 years of common law saying this is how it's supposed to be. Our Constitution, our Declaration of Independence were built on that premise. And here, what we have are, hey, you'll find out if there's a problem with your token when Gary sues you for violating the law in connection with your token. It violates the whole premise of a rule of law to govern, not men, and I know I'm going on too long here, but you look at that, the whole background thing with Hinman. And so you're getting input to the Hinman speech saying, hey, hold on, Hinman, we may want to change our minds about whether something's a security or not. So maybe don't give this clarity, because then people might rely on it. And then we'll just change our minds and say, yeah, that's now a security also, turns out. So anyway, I could go on at length. What we're seeing to me is different in kind. We've seen chairmen make mistakes, often on conflict of interest issues. Sure. A couple chairmen in the last 30 years kind of got in trouble for conflict situations, but Gary's not a lawyer, and so some of the stuff he has pushed, I'm actually have gone along with it.
Now, do you think, and I don't want to get conspiratorial here, if that's the right word, but we know of government revolving doors with TradFi and campaign donations. These are real things and influence that happens, right? We've seen people from Goldman Sachs go work at the government, and we see government officials go work at Goldman Sachs. You alluded to it, right? And Gary Gensler is an example. He was a Goldman Sachs guy, went to work for the government. Now,
exactly.
This technology is so disruptive because it's changing the movement of money and value, and it's taking away power that governments have had for, I don't know, beginning of civilization, right? Or whenever the first civilization was established, or society, whatever it is. And that's why you're seeing this unreasonable take or approach, and that I don't care if I'm breaking the law or I'm not following the rules. I know as an establishment, the government, we're worried about stable coins. We're worried about crypto, that you can move money and it's not our fiat currency. We don't like that. So you can kick and scream all you want. Yes, you can win some court cases, but until we're ready and we're caught up, that's how it's going to be. Do you think there's any credence to that?
Well, I do, because Gary Gensler has said that. He's given interviews where he said, where this blockchain technology leads and cryptocurrency, you're going to have to share this market with the incumbents. You know, he's on video saying that, and boy, oh boy, that's kind of how it's playing out, isn't it? He said that before he was with the SEC, that, and you know, you're right. It's coming from this background of Goldman Sachs. We're going to be a player at every table, you know, and so and that's how it's played out. And with respect to regulation, you know, it's really, really comfortable for the Elizabeth Warrens of the world to deal with the big banks, because they're going to come to the Senate Banking Committee and genuflect and say, yes, you're absolutely right. We're going to get better at that, and we're going to contribute to your campaign as well, and we're going to help you. You know, recently it came out that a bill that she proposed had been written by the American Bankers Association, and she likes to position herself as kind of the, you know, defending the little people against the big banks. But in reality, what is happening up there is defending the prerogatives of the big banks. And, you know, I'm saying this, I represented them, you know, I've retired now, but that's kind of what's happening. And the other thing I would say about, you know, I think you mentioned, you know, being fearful of stable coins and, you know, Bitcoin, whatever it might be. Well, it's not an unfounded fear. I mean, with what is happening to the monetary policy of this country and the dollar, and as you look out forward from here and its status as a reserve currency, it is worrisome to the people in Treasury and in the government generally that there'd be an option out. You know, that's scary, because they're not actually stupid people. They know that if you have an option to something that is going to devalue either slowly or rapidly, but it sure as heck is going to devalue over time, then that's a threat to the authority. Because if you don't control people's money, you don't control them like government would like to do. So anyway, it's going to be interesting from here.
Now let's dive into some of the cases, and we can start maybe with the SEC versus Ripple lawsuit, because yesterday the SEC did win a motion to compel to have Ripple deliver 2022 to 2023 statements around institutional sales. Let's start maybe with Judge Torres' ruling. What were your thoughts around that, and what do you see happening next? You know, who do you think comes out a winner here, or is it split as it was with Judge Torres' ruling? Hi, everyone. Pardon the interruption. I'm Tony Edward, the founder and host of the Thinking Crypto podcast. I have a huge favor to ask you. If you haven't subscribed as yet on YouTube or the podcast platforms, hit that subscribe button, hit the thumbs up button, hit the notification bell on the YouTube platform, and on Spotify or Apple or wherever you get your podcasts, please leave a 5-star rating and review. It supports the podcast. It allows me to bring great quality content to you. Thank you for your support, and I'll let you get back to the content.
Well, I thought Judge Torres' ruling was very good. She's very clear that XRP is not a security in and of itself, which is absolutely right, because it has to be an investment contract, and that involves promises between people. And when you're trading on a Coinbase, for instance, there is no contract being established. Moreover, when you're buying XRP, you're not investing in Ripple. And this is why it's different from equity. When I buy Amazon stock, I am investing in Amazon. But when I buy Ripple, I'm not buy XRP, I'm not investing in Ripple, because I have no rights of any kind with respect to Ripple, to their profits, their income, whatever, assets. I have no equity. What I'm doing is aligning my interests to an extent as an XRP holder with the fortunes of Ripple. And as the use cases grow with Ripple, it's probably good for me as an XRP holder. This is like, in my view, you take the Dallas Cowboys. You can invest, you know, if Jerry Jones is willing to sell 1% of the Dallas Cowboys, you could invest in the Dallas Cowboys. You have an ownership interest, and you would be making an investment in that enterprise. That's a securities transaction. But if I bet on the Cowboys, I'm simply aligning my interests with the performance of that enterprise. And if they win, I win. But in a security, because I don't own the Cowboys, I'm simply aligned with the best interests of the Cowboys. And so I feel like that distinction has not always been well understood with every judge. But in any event, so I think Torres did a very good ruling. It makes sense that she would rule that the initial sales directly from Ripple to institutions where they sit down across the table from each other and draft up a contract that says, I'll do, as the investor, I'm going to do this, and you as Ripple, you're going to do that, and I'm agreeing to hold the XRP for a period of time, a holding period, and we exchange indemnities and whatever, and I'm going to give you the money, Ripple, and you're going to spend it and build something with it. That starts looking like an investment contract, right? And it looks nothing like a trade on Coinbase. So it to me, it makes good sense. Now here on the damages portion here, first of all, winning a motion to compel something happens every day. Motions to compel in cases are very, very common. Right. And so the easiest thing to do is to grant the motion to compel, allow the discovery. And by the way, this is a decision of the magistrate, Sarah Netburn, not Judge Torres, where you kind of lean in favor of allowing discovery, and then Judge Torres is going to decide what really is relevant and what the decision is going to be. And this is going to play out over the next 2 months, where the SEC, for the first time, in my view, is going to explain in detail their theory of what the damages are going to be. And then Ripple gets to respond, and then the judge will make a decision thereafter. So if it were me, I would not settle. I would appeal, whatever it is. You know, in the opinion, it said $728 million is the amount of transactions with these institutions that are investment contracts. So the SEC is going to come up with some number higher for sure. Right. And then Ripple's going to come back and say, hey, wait a minute, you know, a lot of these sales were overseas and not covered by, you know, SEC jurisdiction, and make other arguments to get the number lower. But in the end, I believe both of them are going to appeal. And one of the things I find really, really interesting, Tony, is this is an election year and things could change dramatically. And so you could have a scenario where the judge orders some amount of damages, and Ripple appeals and the SEC appeals the part of the case that they lost. And so we're up at the Second Circuit, and there's an election. And that election could change the direction of the SEC. Right. And as a result, we could see, not just in Ripple, but in other cases, a very different counterparty in this litigation, where they might be very much more interested in a reasonable settlement. And in some cases, I would not be shocked with an outright dismissal of penny cases where, in my view, Gary Gensler may be pursuing a theory that is inconsistent with the securities laws.
Wow. Yeah. I've been thinking a lot about that lately, and how the election will affect a few things. I was speaking to Kathy Wood in a recent interview, and she said that even if, let's say, Biden is to win, she thinks Gensler is going to be out. I'm not sure if that's going to happen, but that's a possibility because he's got these black stains on him from these losses. It's a kind of a PR nightmare for the SEC, the way they handled even like the Bitcoin ETF launch. There's just so much, bad optics, if I can put it that way.
Yeah. You know, this is where people disagree with me in the crypto Twitter community or on shows, and that is, as far as I can tell, there are a significant number of politicians like Elizabeth Warren and Joe Biden who believe that the anti-crypto vote is larger than the pro-crypto vote, or they wouldn't be doing what they're doing. And so while we see this not just losses in litigation, but really pretty bad language of judges, many of them appointed by, you know, President Obama or, you know, whatever, Clinton, whatever, no political axe to grind, just saying that, you know, no faithful adherence to the law, it's arbitrary and capricious and doesn't make sense. You know, the DC Circuit on the Grayscale case, the reasoning just doesn't hold up. So we think that he's got all these black marks against him, where there are a lot of people that are cheering him on to like crack down more on crypto. And so for some reason, and I guess we'll find out in a few months, you know, it's odd for a sitting senator when she declares, I am running for re-election to the Senate, in that speech to say, I'm building an anti-crypto army. When the headlines went out of she's running for re-election, that was the headline.
Yeah.
Elizabeth Warren is building an anti-crypto army. Oh, and she's running for re-election as well. That doesn't happen by accident. That's on purpose. And they believe there are votes there. With respect to, you know, Gary's intent, everybody says his dream job is to be the Secretary of the Treasury.
Right.
So if Biden is reelected, it's possible. You know, it depends what happens in the Senate. The Republicans take over the Senate, it starts getting hard to pass through some of these nominations that may be problematic.
Yeah, so many things hang in the balance with this election. Not just crypto, but there's other issues, but crypto is going to be a big one. And you know, what's fascinating is that over the past year, we saw a lot of presidential candidates, whether they were left-leaning or right-leaning, started pandering to the crypto industry or recognizing there's a large amount of people here and this is a big issue. It's not the top issue on the ballot for many folks, but it is up there and could be a big political force, especially with the amount of money the industry's been raising to lobby pro-crypto and pro-blockchain members of Congress and so forth.
Absolutely. There is that's kind of a hopeful sign, really, that it feels like there's a little bit of a generational divide. So you see really young, you know, smart guys like Richie Torres from the Bronx just nail Gary Gensler in hearings. I mean, it's like, you know, it gives you goosebumps how right on the money he is. And I have said this to everybody that I talk to, please make Richie Torres the keynote speaker at your conference. We need people from this other side, you know, of the political spectrum to be heard and bring their perspective, because it's so important. And he recognizes it kind of as a generational divide. So if there's reason to be hopeful, that would be one. And the second thing on the amount of money being put into campaigns by crypto aligned companies and individuals, to me, it's really low right now. I mean, the big pack that people are talking about came out with 75 million. It ought to be $1 billion. You know, when you think about, I mean, think about what happened. You know, 2023 is a pretty good year. If you own Bitcoin, there are people with a lot of money who should try to shape this debate appropriately not just for the, as they say, their own bags, but because we believe collectively in financial freedom of choice. I never promote a token or anything. All I do is the beginning of every year, and beginning of January, I say, I am going to hold Bitcoin another year, and here are the 3 reasons I'm going to do that. And I do own other tokens, but I don't recommend anything to anybody. What I recommend is that we have a policy in the United States that we individually get to decide, rather than Elizabeth Warren decide, you know what, let's strike that one off the list of available investments and that one. And, somebody did money laundering of $70,000. Let's strike that one off as well. That, to me, is inconsistent with the Constitution, what this country's been all about. And so that's why people like you are really important, to get the message out. We're really talking about financial freedom, because if you don't get to make your own decisions about what you're going to do with the money that you have earned, then you're really not quite as free as you might think you are. And I don't think the people in Washington, D.C. ought to make those decisions for us.
Absolutely. And since we're talking about that, you, I believe, filed a FOIA request regarding the NYDFS removing XRP from the green list. Kind of a clear example of what you're talking about, right? That bias and making decisions for people versus let the free market play out. What do you think is happening there, and any updates around your request?
Well, I would start by saying I have been a fan of Adrian Harris Services and the whole kind of regulatory ethos there. They were the first to adopt this bit license. You've seen it in those documentaries with the Winklevoss guys in there, and they're having these big hearings that resulted in a bit license, which says if you meet all of these requirements, stringent requirements, then you can offer digital assets to New York residents. Hey, that's great. Wish we had that in the United States generally. And as part of that, they adopted something called the GreenList. Again, I've said, brilliant. There should be a list. You can automatically list these tokens because they've been vetted. We're good. They're not securities when traded on the secondary market, which is what we're talking about here. And they're good to go. The more esoteric, the more questionable ones, if you want to add that to your platform, if you're Gemini or Coinbase and those companies that have the bit license in New York, well, then there's a process. You come to us at the New York Department of Financial Services. You explain to us how you've done your analysis to conclude that it's not a security and should be allowed to be listed. Makes perfect sense, So anyway, XRP's on the green list. Judge Torres rules in July of last year that XRP is not in and of itself a security. Then 2 months later, the New York Department of Financial Services removes XRP from the green list with other tokens. It wasn't just XRP, to be clear. There were other tokens that were delisted. But to me, when you have this clarity from a federal judge in the town where you work, the New York Department of Financial Services, saying it's not a security, to me, if XRP had not been on the green list, it should be added to the green list for that reason alone. Instead, it was removed, and the timing was wild. And so I wanted to know why. I mean, that's kind of part of how our government's supposed to work. You're supposed to understand why the government makes the decisions it makes. And so I filed this Freedom of Information Law request in New York. It's an L instead of an A. And asking why, I want all of the documents explaining how you arrived at the decision to delist XRP, and who did you talk to about it? Or were there any other agencies involved in arriving at this decision? They extended their deadline unilaterally twice. And then just last week, they told me, we're not going to give you any documents. And so there is a internal appeal process to the New York Department of Financial Services, which I will follow. And I assume that it will be rejected again. And then at that point, you have to go to court to ask a judge to compel the agency to reveal the documents. And so it's going to take a while, but I'm not going to stop. I mean, I feel like it's kind of such an odd thing to do,
It
you
is
know,
very strange.
that they should have spontaneously explained it, because it's so obviously weird that the judge down the street says it's not a security and boom, it's gone from the approved list. Doesn't make sense to me. And as I said in another show, maybe there's a perfectly logical explanation for this. I would just be delighted to understand what that is.
Yeah, and when they're not forthcoming and they're saying, no, we're not going to give you anything, it's like,
Right.
well, it makes you think, okay, something else is going on here, right? So appreciate you doing that. And look, by no means are you obligated to do this, but are you willing to take it to the courts if they keep denying?
Yes, yes. I've retained a lawyer. I'm licensed to practice law in New York. I've practiced law in New York for many, many years. But I've retained a guy who is an expert in FOIL law, which I'm not. And yeah, we're going to pursue it and see what happens.
Awesome. Let's talk SEC versus Coinbase, because this one really gets my gears going and grinding my gears, I should say, where the SEC approved Coinbase to go public. They knew their business model, they knew the tokens. Coinbase had one of the strictest listing processes over the years. Now,
Right.
I'm going to sue you, and here are a whole bunch of random tokens I'm going to throw into this lawsuit. What do you think about this lawsuit? Do you think Coinbase comes out with a victory?
Well, you know, I just got on Twitter in October, engaging in Twitter in October of 2022. And as a lawyer, what I really didn't want to do is be that guy who's predicting this is what's going to happen in this case, you know, and maybe I bat 60, 70% or whatever. Really didn't want to do that. But to me, the case against Coinbase was far out of bounds in contending that these tokens traded on a secondary market are investment contracts. In my view, not legal advice, in my view, they are not. They're clearly not. And so my pinned tweet, you know, on my page there says, I said this before they were sued, when they were threatening to sue. I'm sure you remember there's a Wells notice process that goes before the lawsuit. When the Wells notice was disclosed by Coinbase, I said, if the SEC follows through and brings this lawsuit, they're going to lose. And here's why. And I have given a long list of reasons, but one of the reasons is what you said. When Gary Gensler testified on May 6th of 2021, this was, I believe, roughly 20 days after they had just permitted Coinbase to go public. 20 days later, he's testifying in front of Congress, and he says to the House Financial Services Committee, hey, if you would like a recommendation from me, I would strongly recommend that you pass some law giving the SEC the authority to regulate these crypto exchanges, because we don't have the authority to regulate crypto exchanges, and neither does our sister agency, the CFTC, where he used to work. He's an authority on that. And he was absolutely right. May 2021, it's on film. And then 2 years later, he pivots and sues Coinbase for not registering as a securities exchange, broker dealer and clearing agency under existing SEC law for NASDAQ, New York Stock Exchange, and that ilk, when he said correctly they didn't have the authority and Congress did nothing in the interim. And so it's, that's really bad, because when he's saying it, he's not just saying it to Congress, he's saying it to the public.
Yeah.
We don't have the authority to regulate this exchange, but we should. We need Congress to do that. And then it's like, well, you know what? Forget that. We're just going to go ahead and do it anyway. And so I really think that's bad. That violates the Magna Carta, the Constitution, and everything else, to just change the law because you say so without Congress having a say so. So anyway, I think Coinbase will win. I think people underestimate how hard it is to win on a motion to dismiss. It's easy to forget. Garlinghouse and Larson didn't win on a motion to dismiss. It had to go to summary judgment. I attended the hearing on Coinbase in New York, and the judge was tough. She's a really, really good judge. I'm highly confident she's going to come out the right way eventually, but on this motion to dismiss, normally, if I'm representing a client, which I did many times in the same court building, bringing motions to dismiss, you tell them less than 10% chance, single digits. So people need to understand, I'm at I think maybe a 40% chance. A lot of people are saying a 70, 80% chance that they'll win. And I hope they're right. I hope they're right, because this should come to an end sooner rather than later. And there's no reason for this black cloud to exist right now. But bottom line, I believe Coinbase will win eventually, and it's going to be a close call on this first move, the motion to dismiss.
Now, one of the scenarios we discussed, and you mentioned that, with the upcoming election, could bring in a new chair and some of these things could be dismissed. However, it is also Congress, where they have 2 bills in the House, 2 in the Senate. Patrick McHenry, leading the House, wants to push through his bills. Do you think we see these bills make it all the way up? I know it's an election year, so it's going to be tough. Or is this a 2025 thing?
I believe it's a 2025 thing. I would be shocked if we had any sort of comprehensive crypto regulation at all. And so the thing that's hanging out there is it possible that we could have a stable coin bill? It's very close in the last Congress, and Patrick McHenry thought he had a deal. And, the word on the street is the White House called Maxine Waters and said, no, stop it. We're not doing this. And that was the end of it. So it's kind of an easy win for everybody. Everybody wants, 100% backed with liquid assets, stable coins, audits, transparency and trading that you can see and track. Who wouldn't want that? I guess the answer is those who view stable coins as a threat to the dollar and to the dollar as a reserve currency. And those who respond to that argument say, you're missing the point here. This enhances the status of the dollar because it's based on a dollar, and it makes the dollar more usable, more easy to use, cross-border, instantaneous settlement of all sorts of different assets. And so it's a good thing. But you know what? A lot of our leaders in positions of authority are pretty old, and there's this saying about old dogs and new tricks. They're just suspicious, of it. And so that's where we are. But it would be nice if we could get that one first step achieved this year.
We got the Bitcoin spot ETFs approved. Obviously, big Wall Street firms have issued them. The marketing has started, and the reason why wasn't because Gary Gensler and the SEC wanted to do it. As we mentioned before, the courts essentially forced them to do it. However, there are applications for Ethereum Spot ETF. And, in context with all the things we've talked about, where Gary Gensler suing all these exchanges, he refuses to say if ETH is a security or not before Congress. Do you think
Right.
an Ethereum spot ETF gets approved on the fact that Gary knows he's going to get challenged in court again and he might lose?
Well, it's, a lot of people are wondering about that. And your focus on Gary Gensler is exactly right. And it may be even more so than people understand, because there are 5 people on the commission. 2 of them are Republican, are probably going to vote in favor of an Ethereum ETF, probably. And the Democrats will not. They voted against the Bitcoin ETF. So it's only Gary. Yeah. This is all about Gary. And when he was forced to approve that Bitcoin ETF, he was excoriated by the anti-crypto forces in the government. And he issued that log statement saying, hey, I'm not endorsing Bitcoin or whatever. And he admitted, the courts made me do it, and so I believe he's going to fight again and make the court tell him again. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but he's a political animal. He was the head of the treasurer for the Clinton campaign. He's a very connected guy politically, and there's a lot of political figures, mainly, not exclusively, on the Democratic side, are very influential, who want this thing to stop and don't want this train to start picking up speed, because God knows where it might go. And so if you ask me, I don't think he's going to approve the Ethereum ETF unless a court tells him, hey, dude, remember when we told you it was arbitrary and capricious? Well, here we go again. And he'll come up with some new argument. And he might say, yeah, Ethereum is a unregistered security, and so you can't do a ETF based on a spot trading in an unregistered security. He might try something like that, but I don't think it'll work. And so eventually I believe there will be one, but I think Gary is going to put it off as long as he can and pass the election if he can get away with it.
But James, do you think, though, look, we saw the impact the Hinman documents and speech and emails and so forth had in the Ripple case, that if he was to block the Ethereum ETF, folks are going to say, hey, I'm going to bring up all the Hinman stuff, and it is going to be a greater spotlight, just showing the incompetence of the SEC and all the things that happened there. And there's talks of conflicts of interest, right, around what Bill Hinman did, because why ETH specifically, and the law firm he was getting paid from, and so forth. These are facts. Right. So do you think he's going to say, you know what, I'm going to prove it because I don't want this stuff to be magnified further?
Possibly. But it's crazy. This Ethereum thing is so crazy. They went into court, Freddie Rispoli, he sued for a declaratory judgment, the SEC, saying, hey, he's saying I use Ethereum in my law practice and for various reasons. My clients use it. I need to know that I'm complying with the law. Again, Tony, it goes back to the Magna Carta. I'm entitled to know, is what I'm doing legal or illegal? And you know what? The SEC successfully moved to dismiss that case, because they said, we have not yet decided whether we think Ethereum is a security or not, which is false, because Bill Hinman decided, and got a lot of input from the other divisions when he said what he said. And so this was the year and a half ago, whenever. We haven't decided. Then Gary goes to Congress and is just cross-examined. Look, it's the second largest token. People need to know. McHenry is saying, my constituents need to know what's legal, what's illegal. Is Ethereum, in your view, a security? And he would say, surely you'll understand that I can't address the status of any one token. And the response was, no, I don't understand that at all. I'm asking you on behalf of Americans who are entitled to know what's legal and what's illegal in the realm of securities laws. And you're saying you refuse to tell them? You'll tell them when you sue them? That's crazy. And then, I don't know, Tony, if this was a coincidence, but Letitia James in New York files a lawsuit against this exchange out of the Seychelles Islands, where she tasked an investigator in her office to try to open an account. And this exchange should not have been available to New York residents, but somehow this guy was able to open an account, and she told him what to do. And they listed, I looked it up one time, over 200 tokens. She told him what to do. She told him, go buy Ethereum and then sell Ethereum. And then we're going to file a lawsuit saying Ethereum is a security. And so there is a state authority, an attorney general of an important state, saying Ethereum is a security. We've got an SEC chairman refusing to say whether it is or isn't. And then in court, the enforcement decision says, we haven't decided yet. So it's ridiculous that we live in these circumstances, and it's not normal. It's not what I experienced, when I was practicing law and dealing with the SEC. They generally played it straight. And all of the lawyers that I hired from the SEC, and I have to emphasize this, I have tremendous respect for the SEC, Tony. The SEC is one of the key reasons that the capital markets of the United States have primacy all over the world, is because of the integrity and history of the SEC. And now they won't tell us what's okay and what's not okay until they sue you. And it's not right, and it's not consistent with how that agency has operated honorably for decades, since 1934.
Yeah, agreed. And it's become so politicized, and I'm curious if you are aware of Congressman Warren Davidson's bill about restructuring the SEC, where you have, I think it's 6 commissioners, and they report to an executive director, if I'm not mistaken. Have you seen that, and any thoughts on that?
I've seen Davidson tweeting about it, and it's portrayed as the get rid of Gary bill, but I really don't know the details, and you got to ask yourself, well, what is the problem actually? And what you see in organizations of any kind, not just agencies of the government, is poor leadership can do a lot of damage in a hurry. Yeah. And so I'm not sure, I'm not for or against the bill. I'm not an expert in the bill. I'm not sure the structure is the problem. I think the leadership is the problem. And so if there was a new leader with a new philosophy, you could imagine that there'd be tremendous reform at the SEC that might get it back on track with respect to what it was originally charged to do, and what it did so well for many decades.
Well, my hope is Hester Peirce becomes chair. I've interviewed her a couple of times, and she smart, level-headed, and she's put forward some great ideas, like I think it's called a regulatory sandbox, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, ideas she suggested over the years, which are common sense, work with the industry instead of attacking it. But we know there's other motives for attacking it. So I hope she can be put into the chair seat, but we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, I think she would be terrific. And, one thing I like about her is when she's traveling somewhere to a conference or whatever, days in advance, she will say, I'm coming to Denver for these 3 days. If you would like to speak with me, send me an email about what you'd like to talk about so that we can make a time to sit down and talk about it. And to me, it's like, wow, what a breath of fresh air.
Yeah.
This is what good government looks like. I may not agree with you, but I will sit down with you and hear your concerns, hear your thoughts, and answer your questions. Ask me anything. Can you imagine Gary Gensler doing that? No, you can't imagine him doing that, because that's not how he works. He wants to do what he wants to do. And you know, what really bothered many of us in the securities bar is for decades, at least 50 years, there was a conference called the SEC Speaks in Washington, D.C., where the chairman and the heads of various divisions and some of their deputies would be on panels addressing the current issues before the SEC, and they would take hard questions from people like me and other securities lawyers, you know, and they were hard questions, and they were, you know, put on the spot, and they would answer them. And there was this exchange so that we better understood where the SEC was coming from. The SEC, as we're representing industry players, understand, you know, and it was like a two-day thing. Great, you know, to get to know people, build some relationships a little bit. He's decided that was over. That tradition was terminated for the first time in 50 years by Gary Gensler, and that really tells us in the securities bar a lot about how he feels about transparency.
I didn't know that, and that is very telling to what your point. And do you think this is a symptom of big government, you know, where these agencies get out of control, or to your point, going back to just bad leadership, or a combination of both?
So I think we're seeing a little bit of a trend of agencies, executive agencies, going beyond their congressional mandate. And so we've seen the Supreme Court reining that in with respect to the EPA. The student loan case is a great example. You know, anybody who was surprised by the outcome of that case wasn't paying attention. And the reason I say that is the Speaker of the House of Representatives was Nancy Pelosi. And she said, people seem to believe that the president has the right to forgive student loan debt. That is not true. Only Congress can forgive student loan debt. The president did it anyway. You know, the Supreme Court says, you know what? This is Justice Roberts saying, Nancy Pelosi was exactly right. Congress has to decide if you're going to forgive billions and billions of dollars in student loan debt. And so we're seeing that in various agencies where they're kind of pushing the envelope to achieve stuff that could not be achieved through our legislative process. And thankfully, we have a judiciary to rein that in. And we might see that, Tony, in the Coinbase case, if that gets to the SEC, that principle of the SEC declaring for itself, we now have right to regulate the entire crypto industry. You could see the Supreme Court saying, no, you don't. Go to Congress, see if you can get that through the legislative process.
James, got some wrap-up questions here for you. First, if you could create your own metaverse, what would the theme be?
Okay, so I would not create a metaverse, even though I'm MetaLawMan. And I thought when I came onto Twitter, I was going to be talking about metaverse issues. I didn't tell you this story. I started engaging in October, and back in 2017, I went all in on crypto, started buying Bitcoin. And I was wondering, oh my God, am I too late? I'm buying this at $3,000, $3,500. 4,000. Oh God, I'm going to regret this. And then I heard about all these other tokens. So I knew I wasn't going to go figure out all the other tokens. So I put some money with some guys who are forming a fund, you know, to figure it out and try to get some alpha out of these other tokens. But in any way, so I start thinking I'm going to be talking about freedom in the metaverse and kind of what are organizational rules and structures that would make sense in the metaverse, because crime is committed in the metaverse. A lot of commerce happens in the metaverse, and contracts are breached and people defraud people. How's that all going to play out? I thought I'd talk about that. Then October 2022 comes around, and I see Sam Bankman-Fried and Caroline Ellison tweets out, hey, CZ, Binance, we want to buy all your FTT tokens at this price. And something struck in my mind of like, this is not normal. Based on my experience as a lawyer, something's up here. I think they have to maintain the floor on this FTT token because it's probably out there as collateral for loans to Alameda, was my guess. Then, the bankruptcy happens, and I get a call. I told you that I put some money with the hedge fund. I get a call, and it said, the call is, we need to have an emergency meeting tomorrow about the hedge fund. And so the limited partners all get together on the phone, and the statement was, hey, we had some of our assets on the FTX platform. Now, fortunately for us, it was, to like 20% of the assets and not 100 or 80 or whatever. But at that point, I got really interested in Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX and all of this stuff, and just left the metaverse stuff behind and focused on legal issues and crypto, focused on that bankruptcy. There was a meeting of creditors where I called in and started posing questions to the representative of, John Ray running the bankruptcy, because I was concerned about conflicts of interest with, Sullivan and Cromwell and other things that they were doing. And from there, it just sort of snowballed for me. So long answer to, all I was cared about was freedom again in this developing metaverse concept. I own these headsets. They're still in the box. I'm not a gamer, not a metaverse guy. My wife's like, I can't believe these things are expensive. You've ordered another one. So in any event, I morphed, over to focusing on crypto. Don't really spend a lot of time in the metaverse.
I got some rapid fire questions for you.
Great. I'm a sushi guy. I love sushi.
Favorite musician or band?
Well, when I was in college, I was obsessed with the Doors. And so I read everything about the Doors, had all the Doors albums, listened to the Doors constantly. But in terms of what is my favorite all-time band, it's probably Pink Floyd.
Oh yeah, Pink Floyd. Favorite movie?
Goodfellas for sure. Yeah.
Classic. Yeah. Favorite book?
Favorite book. So I did some reading in 2023. 2023 was such a great year for me. Got to spend a lot of quality time with my sons. I don't know if you knew this. I was in Twitter jail for 3 months.
Yeah.
I was suspended from Twitter for 3 months. And so I just read. And so I read Lynn Alden's book, Broken Money. I read Walter Isaacson's book on Elon Musk. But the best book I read in 2023 was Food Stamp Warrior by John Deaton, one of the most inspiring books I have ever read in my life. And I would just say anybody who themselves or have a loved one or family member who's suffering, from addiction or trauma or depression or whatever it might be, I would really encourage them to pick up John's book, because what he overcame in his life is really, really amazing. And what he's done now, he's a Marine. He was once a Marine, always a Marine. There's no such thing as a retired Marine. He's a fighter, for people who have no voice, and showed that in the Ripple case and in other ways. And so that's the one I would recommend. Best book I read in 23. Now, if you're kind of in the crypto and money, monetary policy mindset, one of the greatest all-time books I've ever read is called The Mandibles by Lionel Shriver. basically illustrating in novel form what would happen if the United States if the dollar loses its reserve currency status, and how rapidly things will unravel when that happens. And it always happens. It's just a question of when. The Mandibles by Lionel Shriver, phenomenal book.
I have to check that out, because it seems like so timely with everything that's going on, crypto as well as nations moving in different directions, settling a trade and oil and whatever else in different currencies. So very timely.
Right.
I'll have to check that out. James, absolute pleasure chatting with you. Always great information. As I opened with the podcast, I follow you and I get a lot of insight. So I really appreciate it. And, this podcast was full of a lot of insights from you. Thank you so much for joining me.
Hey, Tony, thanks for having me. Once you reached out to me to talk about me coming on, I signed up for all of your channels. You're fantastic. You get really great guests. I don't even know why I got invited. I mean, you got Scaramucci and all these luminaries in the industry. So it's really been fun to be on with you and to finally meet you. And I look forward to meeting you in person at a conference in 2024. So thanks so much for inviting me.